Are SolarWinds attackers acting as Microsoft support agents?
Hey, David, you have another interesting story about Microsoft agent being used by SolarWinds actor to propagate like a new tactic. Could you elaborate more on the details?
Yeah, sure. Thanks again, Ganesh. Yeah, so basically, this is kind of a two-parter, if you want to call it that. So Microsoft is basically tracking new activity, especially consisting of password spraying and brute force attacks, used to try to get into customer accounts. So what Microsoft found and what they've identified so far is that they're tying this back to the Nobelium code name for Microsoft, which they applied to the SolarWinds group or the SolarWinds hackers, as we all know, that were part of the original SolarWinds hack. But again, from this, they're seeing increased amount of password spraying and brute force attacks coming from this group. From that particular activity that they were tracking, they found there were 3 compromised entities so far that they know of and have found, and they've been basically contacted those particular entities or individuals or companies through their nation state, notification process. And as they did kind of a quick analysis, they found that the targeting was basically 57% against IT companies, 20% against government, and there was a small number or percentage against non-government organizations or think tank and financial services. So mainly it was focused on U.S.-based interests. I think it was they mentioned about 45%, 10% in the UK, and then the smaller amounts across Germany and Canada, and about 36 countries were targeted in all across this particular activity that they were noticing coming from that Nobelium group, or again, that they tied back to the SolarWinds attackers, or their code name for the SolarWinds group of attackers. So after they investigated this, or as they were investigating this, stemming from this, they found that there was a customer support agent's computer who had information stealing malware on it. So Microsoft released a statement. They did come out to basically say, yeah, we had found a computer that had information stealing malware on it, on a particular agent or support agent's computer, and that agent did have access to some basic customer information for a small number of customers. The account that was compromised, or the customer account, did actually have what they call highly, targeted phishing attacks sent out as a part of a broader campaign. So Microsoft did remove that particular device from the network and secured it. And then the account, obviously, that was sending or compromised and sending those phishing emails, was locked as well, or prevented from having access. But that does show that the SolarWinds attack group hasn't truly gone away. Not that none of us believe they did go away, or anyone did believe they go, but they're still out there and they're still performing attacks, especially as this activity has shown that Microsoft is tracking. So the second part of this is that on the same day, Microsoft said that one of their driver signing processes basically allowed they called it a malicious driver to be signed through their code signing process as a legitimate binary. However, the research that was done on this truly identifies this as a rootkit. Now, I think Microsoft may finally come around and truly note this as a rootkit, but so there's 2 different, stances. Microsoft calls it a driver, and then the actual additional researchers call it a rootkit. The reason why they're calling it a rootkit is because it does have some definite logic and techniques behind the scenes that are going on that you wouldn't suspect from a driver that's out there to help a company, help a customer to, do a normal process of activities or functionality for software. So the research found that this particular piece of software or driver was basically communicating with the Chinese command and control, or C2 set of IPs. So the name for it is NetFilter. So I mean, if you're looking out there at the Microsoft Security Research Center or others, you can search for NetFilter. They definitely have put out a pretty good write-up on this particular piece of malware, which in essence is a rootkit. And what they said is the goal of it looks to be like a driver that basically allows for the gaming sector. So kind of like your story about gaming, it looks like on this one they were targeting the gaming sector, allowing for a geolocation spoofing. So, so one person can play from anywhere they want to. However, as we know, that isn't always the case. Once it exploits, as you even mentioned, that you exploit one area, usually they shift laterally and try to exploit even more so or compromise additional accounts. The driver here, at the time Microsoft called it a driver, was submitted through the Windows Hardware Compatibility Program, and as I mentioned, it was signed as a legitimate binary. It was created by a third-party company, but ran through the process and signed legitimately and recognized as a valid binary. So that's a little bit of the investigation Microsoft is continuing to do right now, and some of the questions that are surrounding is how was it even possible that this particular binary was allowed to get to that process when it was basically, and it is basically a rootkit. So in that rootkit, it actually calls out to, as I mentioned, several IPs, but there's one IP that is kind of the primary IP, and once it calls to that primary IP, it returns a list of pipe delimited additional URLs with an IP address and a port number. So at the end of the IP address and port number, there's like a /P, there's a /H, a /S, /C, and a /V. Each one of those do different things. So for instance, I won't go over each one of them, and you can definitely read it on the article, but /P is to modify proxy settings. /S, when you make that call to that, it gives you additional redirection IPs that provide it back to the rootkit to further, call out to subsequent IPs to basically allow the malware and rootkit later to self-update itself. And that's one of the URLs as well, a /V, and you can pipe in an MD5 hash, which gives that malware self-update functionality. So again, this really isn't a driver, and definitely not something you expect to be something that's there to help or assist customers or companies. There's no question that this is malicious in its intent, and it's now finally being identified as such. Whereas again, like I mentioned, they eventually Microsoft identified as just a driver. So that basically happened kind of on the same day. So the original article is about, again, SolarWinds with the password spraying and brute force attacks that they are continually doing now in Microsoft tracking. And then we saw that customer support computer was basically compromised with information stealing malware. And then now this driver signing of a malicious rootkit being approved. So not that any of these are linked, but it's really suspect that a lot of these kind of were released on the same day, and it does kind of tie some of them, or seems like some of these could be related, even though, again, as I mentioned, it hasn't been truly identified that all three of these are related or they have any bearing against the SolarWinds attack group. But it's definitely just things to be aware of, that they are still out there, and as we're seeing here from Microsoft, they've got several different areas where they're investigating now and trying to follow up on to determine how, again, the code signing process was invalidated, and then the user's computer was compromised, and then again how that SolarWinds attack group is still continuing to scan and perform attacks against Microsoft. Wow,
that's a lot of information, and
there is there is a lot. I know I was trying to get in, but yeah, there is a lot. And like I say, if you can go read some of those articles, Microsoft on their Security Research Center has good write-ups on both of these, and they definitely will explain a little more. And in there, you can get there's actually 3 IPs. I mean, you can see those on there as well. There's a 110.1 and 245 dot beginning IP address. But again, anyone will want to go out and look at those to truly get the IP address, and then for the rootkit, or the driver, as Marshall called it, but the rootkit, it does lay out the specific areas where some, like the NetFilter.sys file was written to in the app data directory, and it does lay out some of the other directories where the piece of malware, piece of the rootkit are written to, and where it's laid out, so you can go in and try to perform actions. Hopefully, no one's been affected by this. Now, on top of that, Microsoft has, updated the Windows Defender. They've also talked to the different antivirus vendors to give them, updates and different signatures so they can identify this. So there are additional steps out there that for, mitigations. But again, it's just something, to be aware of, especially as big as the SolarWinds. And as we're seeing a lot of this, supply chain attacks occurring and ransomware.
Yeah, on the positive, it's glad to hear Microsoft are identified and they have some sort of protections in place. But on the flip side of it, it's a lot of functionality and features for a driver. The way you explained that scary list of items and features it has.
Yeah.
So, and I believe it's a developing, ongoing investigation, and here we will hear more about the functionality of the driver and probably we'll get to know more information about it.
Yep, that's true. And like I said, and it's good, like I say, it is good that Microsoft released that. I mean, they're always good about releasing their, things that, occur, particular attacks. But, sometimes, as we all know, we have to wait a little bit just to further, make sure we identify properly and can produce that accurate result, accurate steps, accurate mitigation steps. But at least they say, they were quick to come out and just flat out say, yes, that this happened. So that's always, a good step in the right direction, especially when it affects you. So.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one more question, David.
Sure.
Is there any information about where the victims are located, at the 3 victims you mentioned, or is it just too generic?
Well, they didn't list the victims where they were what, but like I say, the higher number of attacks from were listed coming from the United States, right? So 45% U.S.
Okay.
Now it was spread across, and it was spread across, like I say, 57% IT, approximately 20% government. So they were trying. It wasn't necessarily like a spear phishing. Well, it kind of was spear phishing, but not like a targeted only to a couple of users. It was widespread. So that's why they call it a wider spread campaign, and that they were basically just trying to find compromised accounts and then, be able to, access those or use them. So again, but to your question, no, they haven't released anything where they were, who they were, obviously not the who, but, in a general geographic or area of where the attacks were targeting. But again, having said that, it was initially on your typical, industrialized initial 7 nations, right? So us, UK, Germany, Canada, and then, however, on that, there was additional overall 36 countries targeted. So again, just a widespread campaign, and I'm sure there'll be more to come out if it, if it was more of a targeted type, attack with true intent, or was it just to, again, compromise a whole set of accounts and then further or later go into a more targeted, specific spear phishing type campaign.